Zelenak. John?
Thanks, Aaron. Hello, everyone, and welcome to National Distance Learning Week with SUNY Online. My name is John Zelenak, and I am the Operations Manager for SUNY Online. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session and to introduce our speaker. Stephanie Foote is a lecturer at Stony Brook University and the Vice President of Teaching, Learning, and Evidence-Based Practices at the Gardner Institute for Excellence in Higher Education. Stephanie has worked in higher education for more than 25 years in a variety of faculty and staff positions and has taught in the Higher Education Administration program since 2013. Nationally recognized for her teaching, Stephanie strives to create an environment in her online courses that prioritizes student learning and engagement while helping students see the many connections between theory and professional practice. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you, Aaron, and thanks to all of you for joining me this morning. I'm so grateful to be here today, hence the heart on the slides in front of you. So as John mentioned, my name is Stephanie Foote. I like to go by Steph, so please feel free to call me that. I would welcome your comments and questions, and you should have an opportunity to post those if you have any. I'll be happy to address them as we go throughout the presentation. Aaron and John are going to help me monitor the chat just in case I forget something. So I want to mention upfront that I probably have way too much for us to cover today. So I've created a copy of the slides for you all to access so we can follow along together. And Aaron and John will be posting those. And we'll go through as much as we can. And I would love to hear your questions and comments. And then if there are things that we don't get to or something that you'd like to talk more about later, my Stony Brook email address is at the end of the presentation, and I would welcome the opportunity to connect with you. So let me know if you'd like to talk further about any of the ideas in the session today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And thank you, Aaron, for posting the link to the slides. So our goals for today, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to learn and to reflect and to share as you feel comfortable. And by the end of the session, I hope that you all will have some things that you will be able to take into your own professional practice in the online learning environment and adapt and apply. So hopefully there'll be something new that will either come from this session or from our discussion together. So I find that sometimes it's helpful both for the speaker and the participants to have a bit of an outline in terms of the time allocation, the different parts of the presentation and the allocation of time. So I said I have too much to cover, so I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to stay to these times that I have identified for each part of the presentation, but just having this in mind will help me. Hopefully it will be helpful to you all as well. We're going to start off by talking about class beginnings, and then we're going to talk about student engagement and belonging, and then we'll move into identifying an approach, so thinking about the things that I've shared with you and maybe making a bit of a commitment to something that you might focus on as you move into the next semester, whether that be a winter term or a spring term, and then wrap up and discussion. So I want to begin by focusing on class beginnings. And in this respect, I'm not necessarily talking about the beginning of a class period, in a traditional synchronous on-ground or synchronous online setting, but I'm thinking about class beginnings as in the beginning of the term and thinking about support and belonging from that perspective. And there's a lot of research, a lot of which I have not put on the slide. Vincent Tinto's work about retention helps us to understand the significance of the beginning of the term, but also more recently, Jim Lange wrote about student engagement and belonging and the influence that the initial class experience has. So the very beginning of the course has on student feelings about and perceptions of belonging and engagement. So I really want to focus on pedagogical approaches that we can think about and consider in our own design process. So as we're designing our
Hey,
online
Steph.
courses, whether they be
Hey,
synchronous
Steph,
or
can you hear me?
asynchronous.
Hi,
Oh,
Steph.
yes,
It's
I'm
John.
sorry.
Your your
Hi.
slide your slides look funky on my screen here. We're
Oh,
seeing
no.
in version. It's zoomed in and showing only part of your slide, and there's a slide behind it, it looks like.
Oh, that's so strange. Let me stop the share and try to reshare. Thank you for letting me know about that, John. I
Sure.
see others are. That's so weird. because I don't have any slides behind it. I don't know. Does that look better?
So we can see the whole slide for now, for sure, and we could
Okay.
before you began, but is your cursor making it jump? Do you have some sort of enhancement for the cursor as it follows where you're pointing on the screen? No? Okay.
No, no,
Well,
I
we'll try this
don't.
and we'll see what happens.
Okay, yes, please do let me know. I see everybody is letting me know in the chat. Yes, please do let me know. I'll keep my pointer off the slide, so that will probably help too. We want to really focus on those things that we can do at the beginning of the term that will help to communicate, foster, and belonging and engagement. On the right-hand side of the screen is an image that depicts the online engagement framework. This is a framework that I became familiar with in 2018. I've been teaching online for a long time. John mentioned I've been teaching in the higher education administration program at Stony Brook since 2013, but my experience teaching online dates back to 2006. I hate to say that because it sounds so long ago, but it was a long time ago. I became familiar with the framework though in 2018 when it was published, and it really changed my thinking and my approach to the design that I take in my courses. And it really helped me to think about class beginnings, although it's very useful, the framework, throughout the entire design of the course. So the framework, if you're not familiar with it, I won't move my pointer. I want to, but I will not. It starts with, if you think about engagement from these five different dimensions. So at the top in the yellow, there's social engagement. In the blue, there's cognitive engagement. In the um, other blue, there's behavioral engagement. In the green, there's collaborative engagement. And in the orange, there's emotional engagement. We don't have enough time today to unpack the entire online engagement framework, but I would invite you. This is an open access article. It's published in the Online Learning Journal, a publication of the Online Learning Consortium. You can check this out and read it in further detail. But I think that what was so helpful to me as I was thinking about redesigning my own online courses and considering class beginnings, I wanted to find the places in the beginning of my course and throughout where I would consider engagement from all of these different perspectives. And that looks a lot different from what I had initially. Initially I had lots of examples of cognitive engagement, but I wasn't necessarily fostering social engagement or emotional engagement or even behavioral engagement. So this is a useful framework that you might consider as you think about what you can do to communicate belonging and engagement from the beginning of your course. The other thing that I would put out there for your consideration, and probably some of you do this already. This is a screenshot, not intended for any of us to read it. It's just to, give you an idea of this, and there's a hyperlink to it in the slides that you have access to. But this is a pre-course survey. So it's important as we're thinking about class beginnings to find out who our students are and how they identify. And this is something that I do in the courses that I teach at Stony Brook. And I think it's been really helpful to me as I'm designing my course and also thinking about how I can draw students in from the very beginning, even from day zero. And the framework or the survey here is really useful because it helps us to identify different areas where students may be a little bit concerned about the course. So for example, one of the courses I teach at Stony Brook is a theory course. I have quite a few students who are working professionals and haven't been in school for a while, and they are often nervous about a theory course. Some of them are also nervous about APA formatting because they've never written a paper in APA format. So knowing this, I can design from the very beginning of the course resources that I embed into my liquid syllabus, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes, that can help support these students. There are also other things that I find out about my students as well, how they'll access the course materials. For many people, during COVID, this was really important to begin to understand if students had access on a computer or if they were predominantly using their phones. So there are a lot of things that we can find out and consider in the beginning of our course, again, to help students feel affirmed and feel as though they belong. So when I get this information from students, I use it to develop resources and communication with them. And I'm very thoughtfully considering it, not just in the beginning of the course, but throughout. The next few slides that I have have information related to considerations about who our students are. And these are largely generalizations. Some of them are even, um, they're not stereotypes, but they may be, again, generalizations that may or may not apply to our students, but I think they're important considerations. So I think first and foremost, as we think about designing again, for these important class beginnings, we need to consider who our students are, how they identify. So the pre-course survey is really helpful. Then there's generational literature that we might look to also understand some of the things that are influencing how our students show up. And one of the most recent pieces that I've looked at and have thought about and have been considering in my own course design is this book called The Anxious Generation. Has anyone read this book? I'm going to guess that a few people maybe have read it or are familiar with the content. I'll let you all think about that and reply in the chat. If you haven't read it, or even if you have, some of the things that you might consider from this book, some of the themes. So in it, the author says, this generation, the current generation, has increased anxiety and depression. We're seeing that show up in our classes and at our institutions. We're also seeing higher levels of social anxiety and loneliness. And this is at all different levels. So it's not just our current generation, but I can even see some of this, in my 6-year-old, some very early indications of this, where we need a little bit more socialization because of some of the isolation that she had a little bit earlier in life. So there's some potential contributing factors. Obviously, the pandemic. This book was written and published during the pandemic, so there's not really a lot of reflection on that. But, the predominance of social media, access to technology and smartphones has contributed. But I think that, there are a couple of other themes that really resonate with me. And these may be more evident in our undergraduate population, but I also have seen some of this in the graduate students that I teach that are coming directly from undergrad. This idea that, there's been both overprotection and underprotection, meaning, during the pandemic, many of us who are parents really kind of wrapped around our children to protect them physically, but we've also opened them up to a whole nother life and world by allowing them to be online, to have a presence online. That would be the underprotection. And then there's also this great rewiring of childhood, so moving from play-based to phone-based or technology-based. So all of these have an implication, obviously, on belonging and engagement in our courses. And I don't think we can solve the problems here, but thinking about this has really changed the ways in which I communicate with students and thinking about course design. So thinking about being more timely, responding more in the moment, or even, automating things within my course so students can get some feedback a little bit sooner even. And then I really don't have time to unpack this, but from my own discipline, looking at Perry's scheme of intellectual and ethical development is also a really important frame for us. When you get the copy of the slides that I prepared for you, there'll be some notes in there too. So if you're interested, this is a theory that's been around for a long time. It first was published in 1969, 1970, so it's older even than I am, but it's very helpful and I think still relevant to what we're thinking about in terms of online courses and belonging and engagement today. And I think it's particularly relevant because as we look at student development, there are certainly many more influences and different influences on student development. But these stages or positions, I think still are very, very timely as we think about how we can support students. So just to give you a quick brief introduction to this if you're not familiar. The dualism phase at the very beginning, which includes a couple of positions in the theory. So in this phase, we often see students who are operating from a frame where they think things are black or white. They want to know the answer. So sometimes that will present itself in ways that can be somewhat challenging in class. So students may say things like, just tell me what's on the test, or they may get frustrated because you don't give them the answer. You're asking them to do work but not telling them what the correct answer is. So this can be very frustrating because sometimes there's a cognitive mismatch between where the student is developmentally and where we're teaching at in terms of our own pedagogical practice. And then multiplicity is where the student, begins to realize that there is sort of a gray area. There's a space for uncertainty. They know that not all knowledge comes from the professor, the authority figure. So this is where students are more open to collaborative learning, learning from peers, which can be important in an online environment and also in an on-ground environment. They also begin to see that other opinions are valid. So they can begin to be more engaged in discussion board posts or collaborative learning or peer review and feel comfortable when they're in this multiplicity stage. In relativism, the student is, then at this point beginning to think critically. They are also beginning to compare different perspectives and points of view so they can begin to discern and synthesize information, but they can look at and evaluate sources, which is also very important, and they take responsibility for their own judgments. So that's something that is also very important because oftentimes we ask students to defend their perspective or give us evidence that supports what you're thinking about or how you're feeling. And then lastly, moving into the commitment to relativism, this is, where the student is they feel very confident in their beliefs. They understand, how to integrate the new information into their current perspective. They feel confident teaching others. So as we're thinking about, communicating with students and helping them to feel engaged and belonging, we have to consider where they may be at in terms of their own intellectual development. So thinking cognitively how we can design our courses, and I'll get to how we can respond to this in just a moment, but this is an important consideration. So thinking how we can invite them in, it doesn't matter which level they're at, but considering that they may be at different levels and they may progress. So how can we design our courses with that in mind too? And the last thing from a sort of a generational perspective, and again, these are generalizations. So your individual students may look like this or they may look very different. And there are also intersections and intersectionality as well. So we have lots of different identities, but these are things for us to consider as we're thinking about belonging and engagement in our courses. There's this sort of emerging idea of Generation P. And some of you may be familiar with the generational literature that's out there, but Generation P is something that has been talked about. It's the pandemic generation. And I think what's most important here when we think about our online courses, and again, the course beginnings, is to think about the fact that our students, many of them, I know that many of my graduate students have had these very disruptive experiences around the pandemic. So when they think about their educational journey, it's been disrupted by the pandemic, maybe even their plans, as a student in K through 12 and then going into undergrad and then now graduate school, things have really been turned around for them. And in many cases, they are under socialized. They crave the connection, but also um, they have difficulty making connections sometimes with each other. There may also be learning loss too, as we know. But I think that what's most important from an online learning perspective is thinking about how I can, again, looking back to the online engagement framework, how can I help students to feel some social connection and engagement in my courses? And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So now that we've built this foundation to think about our students, who they are, why these class beginnings matter, I want to move into some of the strategies that I'd like to offer for your consideration. So these are all things that I use in my own courses that I teach online. And I think that, based on the evidence that I've collected, they've really made a difference in terms of student engagement and belonging in the online learning environment. So the first thing I would ask you, and this is where we can use the chat, I'd like to ask you about belonging and how you currently communicate belonging in your online courses. So I want you to think about the environment that you've created in your online courses and how is it that you're currently communicating belonging? And what do you think that you might do differently to further communicate belonging and engagement with your online students? So let me give you just a moment to put some thoughts in the chat if you would. And Erin said, if you'd like to use your mic, just raise your hand and we'll be happy to let you have that ability to speak. And Heidi said, students crave connections but have a hard time connecting. That is absolutely true. I've seen that over and over again in my courses. And some of my students, I think, have chosen the path of online learning, some of them who are more um, traditionally aged, because they have not had a lot of success connecting with peers. And so this is a way for them to create sort of a different identity and to not feel like they have to make social connections, but at the same time, they want to make social connections. So they really absolutely need our help in many cases, and even our non-traditional learners too. Right. We have a comment in the chat. I think it helps if the instructor models the connection by introducing themselves first. I absolutely agree, Laura. Uh, we have another comment, low stakes check-in questions at the beginning of each week and synchronous courses that help them share parts of themselves outside of academia, collective playlists for each class. So one of the things that I love to do in a synchronous class, you can also do this in an asynchronous online course, but it seems to work better if it's a synchronous course, is to do something called high-low buffalo. This is where you do a quick check-in and you ask students to share something that was a high, that's the high, something that was a low, if they're willing, and then buffalo is just something that you want to share. And it could be something that's really cool or different or unique that's happened. And students really get into that. They love the high-low buffalo. We'll see if there are any more comments. Yep, Heidi said, encourage feedback even if it seems bad. Yes. And I think that an important aspect of feedback is to consider feedback literacy, the extent to which the feedback is actionable. So, even if it's constructive feedback, sharing it, obviously, and making sure that students have a clear like call to action and agency so they feel like I can do something the next time. I can consider this and I know clearly what I need to do moving forward. Tonga said, I asked students to introduce themselves as a color and an explanation of why. That helps others get to know their peers. I love that. And John said, I don't teach online, but in our remote office where we meet in Zoom weekly, we ask a magical question. I love this. As suggested by an NPR podcast that is fun and reveals personal information if folks want to share. I think that's a fantastic idea. So all of these communicate, all of the things that you've shared, communicate within our environment, our online learning environment, belonging and help foster engagement. And what I want to share now are some ideas. Some of these may be familiar to you, some of them may be new. And I want to share these again because I've used these. These are informed by first by the literature that's out there. So the things that I've already referenced, so using the online engagement framework and thinking about different forms of engagement, looking at the literature about class beginnings, understanding better who my students are. And so these ideas come from that. And thank you, John put the podcast link in the chat. So if anyone's interested in the magical question, I'm going to be using that myself. Thank you, John. So if we focus on class beginnings, we want to better understand who our students are. So I'm going to give you some examples of these in just a moment. So I have pre-course survey in parentheses. So we have some examples of that. I've already shared one, but I have a link with some other really great examples. Communicating the relevance and purpose of our course and helping students feel like I do indeed I'm an important member of this course can be conveyed through the liquid syllabus. Managing our expectations, ours and theirs. So ours and those of our students can come from our liquid syllabus and wisdom wall. Again, I'm going to share examples of these in just a moment. Making our course and discipline accessible to all, the wisdom wall. ensuring transparency in the expectations and evaluation of assignments and activities in the course, TILT, transparency in learning and teaching, and then providing space for students to connect with us and each other. I have some examples that both translate to on-ground and online that I'll talk about that I use in my online courses, but they would also work if you were to teach a blended or an on-ground course too. So really quickly, these are 4 approaches. And again, these may be familiar to you, but there may be one of them that might be different, or maybe the examples that I've linked to are different. So the first one is the pre-course survey. And I also had an example of a pre-course survey in the Understanding Our Students section of this presentation. But this hyperlink, I won't point to it because I don't want to mess up the slides, but the little link at the bottom, if you have the copy of the slides, you can click on it. It will take you to a page that gives you lots of examples of pre-course surveys. So again, this is a great way to get to know your students better and to begin to design with them in mind. So I don't mean to change up all the content in your course, but to think about how you can take their needs and address them by creating resources. Like I mentioned, the APA resources that I've created in my courses. I have lots of student development resources, so they're not quite as intimidated by some of the theory that's presented in our textbook in the theory course. But there are a lot of ways that we can use the information. We can also connect students to resources on campus. I've used the information to make connections in lots of different areas. So this is a really great, valuable resource for us. The next is the liquid syllabus. You may have heard of this. In fact, let me see, has anyone used a liquid syllabus? Before I describe what it is anyone using one or have you used one? Erin says she's seen some from other faculty. Excellent. There are a lot of examples out there. The hyperlink that I have on the screen in the corner for liquid syllabus will take you to a number of those and a short video on the liquid syllabus. So for those who have not experimented with the liquid syllabus, I'm going to tell you this is one of the things that I've done that has really revolutionized my online teaching. And Tonka said, my syllabus is liquefied. It's still a document in a course, but it's written in a conversational tone. I think that's brilliant. I love that. The idea of the liquid syllabus is that you would create, and it could be on a public website. That's, what it refers to here in the definition, but that you would make your syllabus a little bit more accessible, but also student-centered and dynamic. So you're creating ways that students can link to information. You have videos embedded in it. So in my liquid syllabi, I have a welcome video. I talk about my background. I also talk about my connection to Stony Brook. So that's where I began my professional career. I have newspaper articles from back in the day when I worked on campus, silly pictures and things that, again, help to humanize me, my connection to the university, but also my connection to the course. And then in my liquid syllabus, I have lots of information about expectations. I have resources for students. I have links to sample papers. The idea here is that I take everything that I think could help, not everything in the kitchen sink, but everything that I think is important and helpful to students that I want to communicate with them early on. And I put it in the liquid syllabus. And then eventually it also lives in, not Blackboard, in my Brightspace space. So it becomes part of module 0. So ultimately it will live there, but before the course starts, I send a welcome message to my students and I include the liquid syllabus. It has a link to the official syllabus for the class, but there's a lot of really other great gems in it. And I would also say that, there are a lot of different ways to approach it. So Tonka mentioned, again, liquefying her syllabus, making it more conversational and student-centered. So there are small things that you could do like that. And then you could also, take sort of a bigger leap and create something like a standalone liquid syllabus. So again, the hyperlink in the lower left-hand corner of the little post-it that says liquid syllabus will take you to some resources there if you're interested. And then there's Tilt. This is something else that I've implemented in my courses that has really revolutionized student engagement. And also has really decreased the number of questions that students would send me about assignments, especially in the beginning of the semester. So Tilt, if you're not familiar with it, is transparency in learning and teaching. And the way that I use it is there's a Tilt framework that basically for every assignment or activity in the course, you communicate the task, purpose, and criteria for success. And it's reduced, again, the number of questions because there was a time when my students would go to Brightspace and they would see very detailed uh, assignment guidelines. And now they're very short, just task, purpose, criteria for success with a rubric that I use to evaluate them. Again, this has helped reduce questions because sometimes when you have those very long and elaborate assignment descriptions, it's easy to get lost in that. And it helped me to really reduce the noise around the assignments and activities and focus in and show the connection between what I'm inviting them to do and what I'm hoping that they will gain through the course. So the alignment between the course objectives and the assignments and activities. It's very clear to them, it's also very clear to me. So I found that to be very helpful in many different ways. So that hyperlink takes you to the Tilt website where there are examples of tilted assignments and other resources that you might find to be helpful. The last one, I want to show you an example from one of my classes. This is a wisdom wall. Has anyone ever used a wisdom wall? And you may have used one, but you just didn't call it a wisdom wall. I don't see any responses yet in the chat. So let me explain. Oh, Tonka said, yes, I don't call it that, but I ask for advice to future students. And Erin said she's seen something similar with these questions on a Padlet at the end of a course. Exactly. I put mine into a Padlet. So these are questions that you could ask, and this link will take you to a website about the Wisdom Wall. Michelle Pacansky Brock, who I adore, has, I don't know if she, I think she created this idea officially, but she has some really great guidelines on this. So for a long time, I used to ask students to write letters, to future students, or I would ask them to write about advice to future students. But what I began to do a few semesters ago is this. Now, the intent here again is not to read it, although you can zoom in and you can read it if you want to. I'm sharing this with permission. This is a Padlet. So at the end of my course on student development theory, I invite my students to share how they were feeling at the start of class, what they wish they had known, and what advice they have for future students, not just in this course, but in the higher ed program as well. And students have shared very generously. And I put that into a Padlet. They post in the discussion board, and then I put it into the Padlet. And the reason I put it into the Padlet is because then I can link out to it in my liquid syllabus and also for other students who are considering my course. So anytime a student says, hey, Dr. Foote, I'm thinking about taking HEA 502 with you. Could you share a syllabus? I share with them the liquid syllabus and I encourage them to take a look at the Wisdom Wall link there because this is advice from their peers. Again, the things they wish they had known, and then advice they have about the course and also for the program. So I have found this to be incredibly helpful because students will be very honest, obviously with their comments and feedback, but it's been very helpful to other students who are fearful, again, because of the kind of course this is, and because they may have, it's been years since they were in an academic course. So this helps to demystify and help them to feel comfortable and confident, and they can feel that sense of belonging to the course even before we begin. And Tonka said, I share some advice I collect through an announcement at the beginning of the semester. I think that's a wonderful idea. And you could do something like this and link to it in an announcement. Again, I like to share it in my liquid syllabus. So as students are enrolling in the course, I send them a copy of the liquid syllabus with a welcome message, and I encourage them to take a look at the Padlet that I've linked to. So those are 4 strategies. And then I also want to share one more thing that I started doing during the pandemic, and I've continued to sort of to continue to commit to it, but also have revised it as we continue um, to grow and learn. So, first of all, I have this commitment to belonging, and then I have the statement of teaching and learning in 2025 in my syllabi, and then also in my liquid syllabus. So, the idea here is that I want students to know from the very beginning of the course, and again from day zero, but at least from day one, if they're reading this, to know that there are times when we're going to make mistakes in this course, and that happens. That happens in every class. But especially because, in this course, it's an asynchronous class. So students are posting a lot in discussion boards. Sometimes they're making videos, but there's still a chance that we may misunderstand each other. We may misinterpret, we may misspeak. And so these are things that, could happen in this environment. And so we're going to hopefully be patient with each other. And okay, the pointer is off to the side. Not sure I could stop the share and reshare.
Sure, it worked for so long.
I know what happened. Let me
I
stop the
know.
share and reshare.
It
It's
was
because
working great. Yeah.
it's Friday.
There, right. There you go. Now it's perfect.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Erin. I appreciate that. So this is a way for them to know up front that this could happen. And then, of course, as the instructor, if these things really do happen, I'm in the moment responding to them. But it's important that everyone has sort of this base understanding. And then during the pandemic, I had this statement about teaching and learning during the pandemic. And in the years since, I have revised the statement, but I keep it in my courses because I think it's important that students know how important they are and that this course is really about them. I teach students, I don't teach my discipline necessarily. So, above and beyond anything else, we're going to prioritize our humanity, our health, both physical and mental health and well being. And I say this to my students because I want them to come to me if if there are any issues at all, and they do. And I want them to know that I don't need documentation. We can work together to determine what the best course of action will be, if something presents itself and we need to address it. If you don't feel well or if something is happening, and, it's very rare that this happens, but sometimes it does, and it happens to all of us. And so this statement has really helped students from the very beginning to understand where my commitment is, in terms of teaching this course. It is to them, and I want to make sure that they know that and they're prioritized in the course. So let me pause here to see what questions or comments you have about the ideas that I've shared. And I get the impression that many of you are trying these. So I appreciate that very much. And I would love to hear about the successes that you've had as you've used these strategies. Oh, yes, absolutely. And Tonka, you are absolutely welcome to use any of this language. So please feel free. So now we'll move into the commitment part. This is where I would love to hear from you all, and I won't leave the screen up. I'm going to take it down in just a moment. But what have we talked about today that you might consider? What is one thing that you might consider implementing into your synchronous or asynchronous online courses? And is there something that you would like to learn more about? So I'll give you a chance to think about that. The other thing I wanted to mention that I did not include in the slides is a few years ago, I started to create a group in LinkedIn for my classes. So when I teach HEA 502, I have a LinkedIn group. So that's another way to provide both social engagement and opportunities to connect from sort of a disciplinary professional perspective. And I found that to be really fruitful. And I include information about the LinkedIn group in my liquid syllabus as well. So let me post these questions in the chat. And please feel free to post your responses in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute and speak, we would love that too. Just raise your hand and Erin or John will recognize you. So one thing you might consider adapting and applying, and something that there's something that you might like to learn more about.
I know it takes a few minutes to type, Stephanie, so I'll give people that time and just say that I think, some of this too, when I'm working with faculty for professional development or as an instructional designer, I don't teach currently, but I have taught, last year and so forth. Some of this is great for faculty development training as well. And I know that there are probably people on here. I see some names who do their centers for teaching and learning. In particular, I love the tilt approach, right? Just so simple, like to make it purposeful and make it outline the task. I think it's a great approach that I hope to try to incorporate a little bit in the work that I do.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. So I like to use tilt in like every aspect of life now. I feel like I tilt everything. I even tilt things at home. I'm
Sure,
very clear, like I
sure.
have a 6-year-old, so I'm very clear about, the task, the purpose, criteria for success. Like it's helped me so much in my courses. It's reduced the number of questions that I get from students about, what are you asking me to do? How will I be graded? Also, you can tilt feedback. So I didn't talk about that, but that's one of the things that I've done in the last year is to use Tilt as I've created sort of a formula for feedback to my students. So I'm very clear. So, I'm responding to, the task and the purpose and how well they've kind of achieved those, and then speaking to the criteria for success. So you can tilt everything. It's amazing. I see some things coming up in the chat. Laura said, I appreciate your statement on communicating belonging. As an instructional designer, I help prepare instructors to teach online. I'd like to incorporate content on communicating belonging. I think that would be a fantastic idea. Even if, if an instructor didn't feel comfortable creating a liquid syllabus, if they can incorporate, some sort of statement about belonging into their existing syllabus or into Brightspace, just to help students as they're coming in to understand, the humanity, I think it could be really important, to help them feel as though they belong. Karen said, love the idea of a liquid syllabus. However, some departments have a very required template that's not student friendly. Any suggestions? So I'm in a department, I'm a lecturer, so I'm in a department that, has a template and I have to follow the template. So I do. I do have those additional statements. So the statement about belonging and then teaching and learning in 2005. So in the contemporary moment, I have those statements in my syllabi. Then I have my entire syllabus in my liquid syllabus. So there's nothing really that's in the liquid syllabus that the students can't find like in Brightspace or, in the syllabus, but it's very student centered. And again, I have lots of links and I have examples. And I just found that it bridges the gap. I know that there are only so many things I can do and stay within sort of the template that I need to stay within in my department, but I can add some of this in through the liquid syllabus and again, humanize some of the course and help students to feel the connection to me, to the course, to the discipline, to the institution as well. I put my contact information up on the screen because, again, I would love to hear from you all. So if there are things you're considering or if you'd love other examples, I'd be happy to share with you more examples from my classes. My Stony Brook email address is on the screen, and you can also find me on LinkedIn by searching using my name. Karen said, thank you. Sounds like the liquid syllabus includes required areas and adds the human element. Yes, it does. Absolutely.
All right, thank you, Steph. I'm going to wrap it up here with a little blurb. Thanks to all the attendees for your attention and participation in today's webinar. This concludes SUNY Online's National Distance Learning Week offerings. Thanks for being here for our last session. Recordings of this week's National Distance Learning Week sessions will be posted on our website. National Distance Learning Week is sponsored by the USDLA Distance Learning Association, who also hosts additional events this week. Check them out at their event site. Please provide feedback on your experience with our sessions this week by completing the brief survey. Thank you. And I'm going to post some links quick in the chat where you can find additional information in our recordings.